Claude had a history of working in Canada in the summertime because his in-laws owned a sawmill up there. And he had learned how to fish the various lakes. I'm out of dental school and, in pretty good shape. And so he invited me to go fishing with him up at Nations Lakes, which is a string of 5 lakes connected by a stream of water. We had the Sawmill Company boat, which was a V-bottom boat. That means it had to have quite a bit of water in order to float it. And some of these creeks, we didn't know whether this V-bottom boat would get up those creeks. And we wanted to go up to the 3rd lake. We towed a small flat-bottom boat with an outboard motor. When we got to the first river between the lakes, we determined that we would be able to get up that river in the V-bottom boat. And so we pulled our little boat that we were towing off on the seashore, and we put a can of gas there and left that boat sitting on the beach. We were hunting for moose. And the way we hunted that country is that we would cruise around the edge of the lake and we would look for a black dot over on the beach. That meant there was a moose over there on the water. And there was about, say, 30 yards of beach between the edge of the water and the thick forest. We would just turn our boat and head directly for that black dot at about 3/4 speed, something that was smooth. I would get down low in the front of the boat and Claude would be up in the back of the boat, and we got our guns out, kept getting closer and closer. Eventually the moose would hear us or see us, and he would lift his head and turn towards the thick, dense forest. And that's when we would open up on the moose. If we got a kill, then we would tie a rope around the moose and hook him onto the boat and drag him back to our camp. And there we'd pull him out of the water and hang him up and dress him out and skin him and cut the meat up, let it cool for the night. Well, one of the problems that happens, and you always have a problem, is that the battery on this boat went dead, and the boat was too big a motor to have a pull start or anything like that. So we pondered that for an appropriate length of time and then decided that the only way that we were going to solve this problem is that we were going to have to go over to the edge of this lake and walk back to where our little boat was sitting on the edge of the river with a can of gasoline. Our cabin was on a little island, and it was about maybe 50 yards offshore. This was a matter of urgency because we were due back in Boise, Idaho on a given date. And if we didn't arrive in Boise, Idaho on the given date, LaRue, who was Claude's wife, would get a hold of her dad, and her dad would call the Canadian Northwest Mounted Police, and there would be a full-fledged search for us. With this in mind, we decided we needed to walk out, get in our little boat, and make it back and get on the telephone and tell them, we're going to be late, don't call the police. So,
no cell phones, of course.
No cell phones. It was a landline, and you had to go to where the landline was. So we thought, well, we'll get up early in the morning and we'll fill our pockets full of cooked moose meat, and we'll take one rifle with us. We were afraid that we might run into a grizzly bear. That's the reason we took one of the rifles with us. We rowed this big boat. We had paddles in there, and we paddled it laboriously over to the beach. And the problem was when we got over to the beach, it wasn't sand, it was rocks. After we got tired of struggling through the rocks that were covered with slippery moss, we decided, well, let's go inland and walk through the trees and just keep track of where we are. And by the way, the shoreline of any lake is not a straight shoreline. It always goes in and out and in and out. So the distance to go from point A to point B is much further. We went inland and discovered that some 40 years ago, there had been a forest fire there. And there was a whole bunch of deadfall, anywhere from a foot high to waist high. Finally, 14 hours later, we arrived at the destination where our little boat was tied up. In Canada at that time of year, the days are long, so it was still daylight. We get to where the boat is and we look across there, and the gas can is turned upside down, which means a bear has visited. We have this river to cross to get over to our little boat. You know, it's almost up to our waist, but we wade across the river. Keep in mind, we've been walking all this distance. Our bodies are heated up and we're sweaty. And we get over there and there's gas in the gas can. And there's nothing wrong with the little boat. So we get in the little boat, put the gas in the motor, pull the string and start the motor, and then we head out down this long, long lake to where we can get back to where there's civilization and a telephone. These little boats, they don't go that fast, and they're open. We're wet and sweaty, and now it's starting to turn cold. And by the time we got back down to where the telephone was, it was really cold. In fact, I've never been so cold, because when you're out on the water and you're wet and it starts to turn cold, you have no protection. We didn't take any coats with us because that would have been too heavy. Anyway, we finally get down to where the phone is, call Claude's wife, tell him what the problem is, and we're going to be a couple of days. And then we had to go through the process of getting a new battery, putting it back in the little boat, chug, 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 up the lake to the second lake, and then up to where we're finally camped for this hunting trip, the cabin. Put the new battery in the boat and head out on our way home. To follow up on how we got the meat from 2 large moose from Fort St. James, British Columbia to Boise, Idaho. First of all, we boned the meat out, and then we would wrap it in our sleeping bags and our bedding, anything in the bottom of our boat, which we were pulling behind a vehicle. It would take 2 days to get there. So we put this meat in there, and then we would put dry ice around it, and that would keep it cool, not frozen, but cool enough so that when we arrived in Boise, we would then get it out and cut it up in chunks, and then we would wrap it in freezer paper and freeze it. And that's how we handled our meat. Claude Brown, I met at Utah State University in 1955 or 56, right after I was married. I'd known his wife, LaRue, for a number of years before that. He had just gotten out of the Navy, and he and I studied together because we were both taking pre-medical classes, pre-dental or pre-veterinarian. So we became good friends. Since that time, we've made it an occasion to do a lot of fishing and hunting and everything else. When it came time to apply for dental school, we both applied to several schools and received acceptances. He received an acceptance from Northwestern University, and I received one from Baylor University in Texas. And then we both received one from Washington University in St. Louis, Missouri. That's how we decided where to go to dental school.
So you could go together.
So we could go together. So that's one of the friendships that's lasted.
Clear till now.
Clear till now. I went fishing last year with Claude. I was 80 and he was 82. And we used to make fun of all the old men that went fishing, but we don't do that anymore. We celebrate their persistence. and their skill